The sound of his fist hitting the wall beside her head still echoed in Tessa Owens's ears as she stumbled through the rain-soaked streets, one hand pressed against her swollen cheekbone, the other clutching the thin jacket she'd grabbed on her way out. Blood trickled from her split lip, mixing with the cold rain that plastered her dark hair to her face, and every breath felt like shattered glass in her lungs. She'd run before, always come back, always believed his apologies. But tonight something had broken inside her, not just her face, but whatever fragile hope she'd been clinging to that Marcus would change. The city streets blurred around her as she ran, designer heels abandoned 3 blocks back, her bare feet slapping against wet pavement. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away, had to put distance between herself and the man she'd married 2 years ago, in a ceremony that now felt like a funeral. Thunder rolled overhead and the rain came down harder, turning the world into a watercolor painting of streetlights and shadows. Tessa turned down an unfamiliar street, her vision swimming from pain and exhaustion. The buildings here looked older, grander somehow, their architecture out of place among the modern steel and glass of downtown. Gothic spires reached toward the storm-dark sky, and iron gates guarded entranceways that seemed to lead to another time entirely. Her legs gave out on the steps of the largest building, a mansion that loomed like something from a Victorian nightmare, all dark stone and pointed arches. She collapsed against the massive wooden door, her body finally surrendering to the adrenaline crash. Through the haze of pain, she heard the sound of heavy locks turning, felt the door shift behind her. She fell backward into warmth and light, landing on polished marble floors that gleamed like black mirrors. Strong hands caught her before her head could strike the ground, and Tessa found herself staring up into a face that couldn't possibly be real. He was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, all sharp angles and pale perfection. White hair fell past his shoulders, longer than any man she'd ever seen wear it, contrasting sharply with the black silk shirt that hung open at his throat. But it was his eyes that held her frozen deep crimson, like garnets or fresh blood, with an intelligence that seemed to pierce straight through her skin and see everything she'd been trying to hide. "Who did this to you?" His voice carried an accent she couldn't place, old and refined, with an edge of barely controlled fury that made her shiver. Despite the warmth radiating from the fireplace, she could see blazing in the room beyond. Tessa's voice cracked. She tried to push herself up, away from this stranger who held her with a gentleness that contradicted the rage burning in those impossible eyes. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I'll go." "You will not." The words weren't a suggestion. He lifted her as though she weighed nothing, carrying her deeper into the mansion. "You're bleeding on my doorstep. That makes you my concern." The doors slammed shut behind them with a finality that should have terrified her. Instead, Tessa felt something loosen in her chest, some knot of fear that had been wound tight for months. She heard the sound of multiple locks sliding home, heavy bolts being thrown, chains rattling into place. The vampire, because that's what he had to be, nothing human looked like that, was sealing them inside together. "My name is Nicolae Frost," he said, settling her onto a velvet sofa near the fire. "And you have taken sanctuary in the home of the Vampire King." Tessa laughed, a sound halfway to hysteria. "That's not real. Vampires aren't real." Nicolae tilted his head, studying her with those unnerving crimson eyes. Then he smiled, revealing fangs that gleamed in the firelight. "Tell me, does your husband exist?" "Yes," she whispered. "And yet you ran from him. You sought escape in the storm, in the night, in the territory of monsters." He moved to a cabinet, returning with supplies she recognized from 1,000 emergency rooms she'd lied to. "Perhaps you already knew, somewhere deep in your survival instinct, that sometimes the monsters outside are kinder than the ones we marry." His hands were impossibly gentle as he cleaned the blood from her face, his touch cool but not unpleasant. Tessa watched him work, noting the way he moved with absolute certainty, the way his jaw clenched when he wiped away the blood from her split lip. "What's your name?" Nicolae asked, his voice softer now. "Tessa. Tessa Owens." "Tessa," he said it like he was tasting the word, memorizing its shape. "Who did this to you?" "My husband, Marcus." The admission came easier than she expected. Something about this impossible creature with his ancient eyes and careful hands made her want to tell the truth. "He's done it before. I always went back. But tonight you chose to live." Nicolae finished bandaging the worst of her wounds, then sat back on his heels, regarding her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable. "Do you know what you've done, coming here?" Tessa shook her head, suddenly aware of how little she was wearing, just the thin dress she'd had on for what was supposed to be a romantic dinner, now torn and soaked through. She pulled her jacket tighter around herself, though it did little good. "In the old laws, in the codes that govern my kind, when a mortal seeks sanctuary at a vampire's threshold, That vampire is bound by honor to protect them. Nicolae's eyes never left hers. You came to my door, you bled on my steps, and I bolted the locks behind you. That means I have accepted the bond. Until you choose to leave, you are under my protection. Anyone who wishes you harm will have to go through me first. That's insane, Tessa breathed. You don't even know me. No, Nicolae agreed. But I know cruelty when I see it, and I know that no one deserves to wear fear like a second skin. He stood, moving to the fireplace with that preternatural grace that marked him as something other than human. You may stay as long as you need. My home is extensive, and I have many rooms. You'll be safe here. Why would you do this for a stranger? Nicolae turned to face her, and in the firelight his white hair seemed to glow like a halo around his sharp features. Because 300 years ago, I failed to protect someone who needed me. I will not make that mistake again. The weight in those words suggested centuries of regret, of loss that time hadn't healed. Tessa felt tears burning behind her eyes, not from pain but from the sheer unexpected kindness of this creature who shouldn't exist. I don't understand any of this, she said, her voice breaking. Yesterday my life made sense. Horrible sense, but sense. And now I'm sitting in a vampire's mansion being offered sanctuary like I've stumbled into some kind of fairy tale. The world is larger than you were taught to believe, Nicolae said gently. We exist in the shadows, in the spaces between what humans acknowledge and what they fear. We have our own societies, our own laws, our own kingdoms beneath the cities you walk through every day. He moved back to her, crouching so they were eye level. And you, Tessa Owens, have stumbled into mine. Will you hurt me? The question came out small, childlike. Never. The conviction in his voice was absolute. I am many things, predator, king, monster in the eyes of your world, but I do not harm those under my protection. That is my oath to you. Tessa wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him more than she'd wanted anything in years. But trust was a muscle she'd forgotten how to use, worn down by too many broken promises. Nicolae seemed to sense her doubt. He stood, offering his hand. Come, let me show you to a room where you can rest. We'll speak more when you've recovered from your flight. She took his hand, surprised by the strength in those cool fingers. He led her through corridors that seemed to stretch on forever, past paintings that looked like they belonged in museums and furniture that predated electricity. The mansion was a testament to age and wealth, every surface gleaming with care, every detail speaking of centuries of accumulation. The room he brought her to was larger than the apartment she shared with Marcus, dominated by a four-poster bed draped in deep crimson silk. A fireplace crackled against one wall, and through tall windows she could see the storm still raging outside. There are clothes in the wardrobe that should fit, Nicolae said, gesturing to an ornate cabinet, and a bathroom through that door. Take whatever time you need. I'll have food brought up shortly. I don't know how to thank you, Tessa said, feeling awkward and overwhelmed. Thank me by resting, by healing, by remembering that you are worth more than the violence someone inflicted on you. Nicolae moved toward the door, then paused. There is one thing you should know. Dawn comes in a few hours. When it does, I will retreat to my chambers, where sunlight cannot reach. You will have freedom of the house, but you will not see me again until nightfall. If you wish to leave before then, the doors will open for you. But I hope you'll stay. Why? Tessa asked. What do you get out of this? Nicolae's expression was difficult to read, centuries of emotion flickering across his features like shadows. Perhaps I'm hoping that by saving you, I can redeem something I lost long ago. Or perhaps I simply cannot bear to see cruelty go unanswered. Does it matter? I suppose not, Tessa admitted. Rest, Tessa, you're safe now. He left, closing the door softly behind him. Alone for the first time since her flight through the storm, Tessa let herself fall apart. She stripped off her ruined clothes, stood under hot water in the bathroom until her skin was pink and raw, and cried until she had no tears left. Then she dressed in one of the nightgowns from the wardrobe silk, so fine it felt like water against her skin, and crawled into the enormous bed. She thought she wouldn't sleep, that the strangeness of everything would keep her wired and anxious. But exhaustion pulled her under like a tide. And for the first time in months, she slept without fear. She woke to pale daylight filtering through the curtains and a silver tray on the bedside table laden with food, fresh fruit, pastries that smelled like they'd just come from an oven, coffee still steaming in a delicate china cup. A note in elegant script read simply, "Eat. Heal. You are welcome here." Tessa ate mechanically, her mind trying to process everything that had happened. In the light of day, it all seemed impossible: vampires and sanctuary, and a white-haired king who'd taken her in like she was something precious rather than broken. Her phone buzzed in the pocket of her ruined jacket, still draped over a chair where she'd left it. 17 missed calls from Marcus, 23 text messages, progressing from apologetic to angry to threatening. She turned it off without reading them all, her hands shaking. He would come looking for her. Marcus didn't accept being defied, and running away was the ultimate defiance. The thought sent ice through her veins, but she remembered Nicolae's words, anyone who wishes you harm will have to go through me first. Could even someone like Marcus stand against a vampire king? She spent the day exploring the mansion, unable to sit still. The place was enormous, room after room filled with treasures from ages she could only guess at. A library held books in languages she didn't recognize, leather-bound and ancient. A gallery displayed paintings of people in period dress, all of them sharing Nicolae's pale coloring and crimson eyes, his court perhaps, or his family. In a sitting room she found a portrait that made her pause. A young woman with dark hair and a gentle smile, dressed in clothing from maybe the 1700s. Something about her eyes looked sad despite the smile, and Tessa wondered if this was the person Nicolae had mentioned, the one he'd failed to protect. Her name was Marguerite. Tessa spun to find Nicolae standing in the doorway, though the sun still streamed through the windows. He wore different clothes now, modern slacks and a white shirt that made his pale skin seem to glow. But he moved carefully, staying in the shadows where sunlight couldn't reach. I thought you couldn't be awake during the day, Tessa said. I am weakened by daylight, not destroyed by it. The old stories exaggerate. He moved closer, staying in shadow, his eyes on the portrait. Marguerite was mortal like you. She came to me seeking protection from a man who meant her harm. I was younger then, more concerned with my own affairs than with honoring the old laws. I turned her away. What happened to her? He killed her. Slowly, painfully, and I learned too late that power without compassion is just another form of monstrosity. Nicolae's jaw was tight, centuries of regret carved into his features. I swore then that I would never refuse sanctuary again, that I would use my strength to protect rather than simply to rule. Tessa felt her throat tighten. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was my failure and I've carried it as I should. But when I saw you on my doorstep last night, bleeding and afraid, I saw a chance to honor her memory, to be the protector I should have been. He finally looked away from the portrait, meeting her eyes. How are you feeling? Confused, scared, grateful. Tessa touched her bruised cheek gingerly. My husband will look for me. He won't let me go that easily. Let him look. Nicolae's voice dropped to something dangerous, something that reminded her he was a predator despite his kindness. Let him come to my door and demand your return. He will learn what it means to face something older and far less forgiving than human law. You'd really fight him for me, a stranger? You stopped being a stranger the moment you bled on my threshold. Nicolae moved fully into the room now, the shadows long enough as evening approached that he could navigate safely. In my world, bonds of protection are sacred. You are mine to guard until you choose otherwise. That is not a burden, it is an honor. The intensity in his gaze made her heart race, not from fear but from something she couldn't quite name. This creature, this impossible being, looked at her like she mattered, like she was worth protecting. When had anyone last looked at her that way? Tell me about your world, Tessa said, desperate to think about anything other than the warmth spreading through her chest. You said you had kingdoms beneath the cities. What does that mean? Nicolae's expression lightened slightly, pleased by her curiosity. Come, let me show you. He led her deeper into the mansion, down stairs she hadn't noticed before, spiraling down into the earth. The walls changed from modern construction to old stone, and the air grew cooler, charged with something ancient and powerful. They emerged into a vast chamber that took Tessa's breath away. It was a throne room, but unlike anything from human history. The ceiling soared overhead, held up by pillars carved with symbols that seemed to shift in the torchlight. The throne itself was carved from a single piece of black stone, embedded with gems that glowed with their own light. Around the chamber, other doorways led off into darkness, suggesting a whole network of rooms and passages beneath the earth. This is my court, Nicolae said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. From here I govern the vampire clans of this city and the surrounding territories. We have our own laws, our own disputes, our own politics. We've existed alongside humanity for millennia, hiding in plain sight, shaping history from the shadows. That's terrifying, Tessa breathed. Is it? We maintain order among our kind, prevent the chaos that would result if younger vampires were left to hunt without restraint. We're the reason your kind doesn't wake to blood-drained corpses in the streets. Nicolae moved to the throne but didn't sit, instead leaning against it casually. We're not monsters, Tessa. Or rather we are, but we're civilized monsters. We have codes, honor, rules that keep us in check. Do you kill people? The blunt question hung in the air. Nicolae regarded her steadily. I have in my long life, in war, in defense, in execution of our laws. But I do not kill for pleasure, and I take no more blood than I need to survive. There are willing donors, humans who trade their blood for money or protection, or the thrill of it. We're not the mindless predators of your stories. But you could be if you wanted. Tessa felt like she was testing him, pushing to see where his limits were. Yes, Nicolae admitted. I could tear through this city like a plague if I chose. But what would that make me? Power without restraint is tyranny. I've lived too long, seen too much, to indulge in meaningless violence. He pushed away from the throne, moving toward her with that uncanny grace. I understand your fear. You've just escaped, monster. Why should you trust another? You're different, Tessa said, and she was surprised to realize she meant it. Marcus hurt me, because it made him feel powerful, because he could. But you've been nothing but kind. Kindness is a choice, not a weakness. I learned that lesson at great cost. Nicolae stopped a few feet away, his crimson eyes searching her face. You're not a prisoner here, Tessa. If you want to leave, I'll ensure you have resources, protection, somewhere safe to go. But if you choose to stay, I want you to understand what that means. What does it mean? It means you become part of my household. Under my protection, yes, but also under my rule. If you stay, you exist in my world now, and that comes with its own dangers. His expression was serious, almost stern. There are vampires who would see a mortal in my court as a weakness to exploit. There are old enemies who might try to use you against me. It's not a decision to make lightly. Tessa thought about the alternative, returning to Marcus, or fleeing to some city where she knew no one and had nothing. Starting over with empty pockets and a police record that wouldn't help her get a restraining order Marcus would just ignore anyway. Or staying here in this impossible place under the protection of something powerful enough to actually keep her safe. I want to stay, she said. At least for now, until I figure out what comes next. Something flickered in Nicolae's eyes, relief maybe, or satisfaction. Then you'll need to understand the rules. During the day you have freedom of the house, but don't venture outside. At night, when my court convenes, you'll remain in the residential areas unless I'm with you. Some of my kind are less evolved in their thinking about humans, meaning they'd hurt me, meaning they'd see you as prey, and I'd be forced to execute them for breaking sanctuary. I'd rather avoid the political headache, he said it lightly. But Tessa heard the steel underneath. Also your husband, if he comes here, do not go to him. Do not let his apologies or threats sway you. Let me handle him. You really think he'll come? Men like him always do. They don't release their control easily. Nicolae's expression darkened. But he's human, and humans break so very easily when they realize they're not the apex predators they believe themselves to be. A chill ran down Tessa's spine, but it wasn't fear, it was something darker. More satisfying. The thought of Marcus facing something he couldn't bully or intimidate or hurt made her feel things she probably shouldn't feel. Is that wrong? She asked quietly. That I want to see him scared? That I want him to feel a fraction of what he made me feel? No, Nicolae said firmly. That's human, that's justice. Don't let anyone convince you that wanting your abuser to face consequences makes you as bad as him. It makes you someone who understands that actions should have repercussions. They returned to the upper floors as true night fell, the mansion coming alive with lights and movement. Tessa heard voices in distant rooms, musical and strange, speaking languages that predated anything she'd learned in school. Nicolae's court was gathering. Will you introduce me? Tessa asked, suddenly nervous. Not tonight. Let them know you're here, that you're under my protection, but maintain distance until you're ready. Nicolae paused at the base of the grand staircase. Though you'll meet some of them inevitably. They're curious creatures, vampires, especially about anything unusual. And a mortal taking sanctuary with the king is very unusual. As if summoned by his words, a figure appeared at the top of the stairs. She was breathtaking, pale as Nicolae, with white hair that fell in intricate braids down her back, and eyes like chips of amber. She wore a gown that looked medieval, all velvet and gold embroidery. Nicolae, darling, you've been hiding something from us. Her voice carried amusement and an accent even thicker than his. She descended the stairs with impossible grace, her eyes fixed on Tessa. A mortal, in your private residence. How scandalous. Vivienne, this is Tessa. She's taken sanctuary here and is under my protection. Tessa, this is Lady Vivienne Solari, one of my oldest companions. Companions, he says, as if we haven't known each other for 500 years. Vivienne circled Tessa like a cat examining a new toy. She's lovely, Nicolae, and that bruise someone struck her? The playfulness vanished from her voice, replaced by something cold and dangerous. Her husband, Nicolae said. How very mortal. How very tedious. Vivienne's lip curled in disgust. Will you be killing him? Please say you'll be killing him. I do so enjoy it when you get righteous. That's not your concern, Nicolae said firmly. Everything that happens in your court is my concern. I'm your second, or have you forgotten? Vivienne finally stopped circling, standing directly in front of Tessa. You mortal girl. Do you understand what you've walked into? Do you comprehend what it means to take sanctuary with the Vampire King? I'm starting to, Tessa managed, refusing to look away from those unsettling amber eyes. Good. Then understand this: Nicolae is generous, but he is still a king. His protection comes with expectations, loyalty, discretion, and absolute obedience to the laws of our kind. Vivienne leaned in close enough that Tessa could see her fangs. Break those laws, betray his trust, and his protection vanishes like smoke. Am I clear? Vivienne, enough? Nicolae's voice cracked like a whip. I'm merely ensuring she understands the stakes. Vivienne straightened, her smile returning. But you always did have a weakness for broken things, my king. Very well. The mortal stays and we all pretend this is perfectly normal. She swept past them, her gown trailing behind her. Do try not to fall in love with him, dear. It never ends well. Silence fell in her wake. Tessa felt like she'd just survived some kind of test she hadn't known she was taking. Don't mind Vivienne, Nicolae said. She's protective and suspicious by nature. It's kept me alive this long. Will they all be like that? Your court? Some will be worse. Some better. But they'll all obey my word. And my word is that you're not to be harmed or harassed. He offered his arm in an old-fashioned gesture. Come, let's get you fed properly, and I'll answer whatever questions you have about this strange new world you've entered. They ate in a dining room that could have seated 30, though it was just the two of them. Nicolae didn't eat, of course, instead sipping from a crystal glass filled with something dark red that Tessa tried not to think too hard about. But he kept her company, telling her stories about the city's history, about the vampire courts and their intricate politics, about the balance they maintained with the mortal world. Don't humans ever find out? Tessa asked, picking at her third-course food that was better than anything she'd eaten in years. Sometimes. Usually they're dismissed as crazy, or we ensure their silence through less pleasant means. We have people in key positions, police, government, media, who help maintain the fiction that we don't exist. Nicolae swirled his drink thoughtfully. It's easier than you'd think. Humans see what they expect to see. We've perfected the art of hiding in plain sight. It's kind of terrifying, knowing you're out there. Is it more terrifying than knowing that human monsters like your husband walk free, protected by laws that prioritize keeping families together over keeping victims safe? Nicolae's gaze was piercing. We may be predators, Tessa, but we're honest about what we are. We don't pretend to be civilized while committing atrocities. She couldn't argue with that. Marcus had always been so good at presenting the perfect face to the world, the successful businessman, the devoted husband. No one would have believed her if she'd told them what happened behind closed doors. Hell, she'd barely believed it herself for the first year, always making excuses, always thinking she could fix things. Do you regret marrying him? Nicolae asked, his voice gentler. I regret staying as long as I did. I regret believing his promises. Tessa set down her fork, her appetite gone. I regret not being strong enough to leave sooner. Strength isn't always measured in grand gestures. Sometimes strength is surviving one more day, lasting until you find your moment to run. Nicolae reached across the table, his cool hand covering hers. You did leave. You saved yourself. That took more courage than most ever find. His touch sent electricity up her arm, and Tessa pulled back, confused by her own reaction. She'd just escaped one man. She shouldn't be feeling anything for another, especially not one who was a completely different species and probably saw her as a curiosity at best. But Nicolae's eyes held understanding, as if he could read her thoughts. He stood, smoothing his shirt. It's late. You should rest. Tomorrow night, if you're comfortable with it, I'll introduce you properly to the court. Give them a chance to see you're under my protection. And if they don't accept me, then they'll learn that my protection is not a suggestion, it's an absolute. The authority in his voice was unmistakable. This was the Vampire King, not just the kind stranger who'd taken her in. Sleep well, Tessa, you're safe within these walls. She returned to her room, her mind spinning with everything she'd learned. Vampires were real. They had kingdoms and laws and politics, and she was somehow caught up in all of it, because she'd run through the rain and collapsed on the right doorstep. Or maybe the wrong doorstep, depending on how this all ended. That night she dreamed of crimson eyes and gentle hands, of a voice promising protection she'd never known she needed. She woke to find Nicolae sitting in a chair by her fireplace, reading a book that looked centuries old. Dawnlight was just starting to creep through the curtains, painting everything in soft gold. Did you watch me sleep? Tessa asked, pushing herself up against the pillows. Only for a moment. You were having nightmares. I wanted to ensure you were all right. He set the book aside. You called out several times your husband's name. Shame heated her cheeks. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disturb you. You didn't. But it concerns me the hold he still has on your dreams. Nicolae moved to sit on the edge of her bed, a liberty that should have alarmed her but somehow didn't. Has he tried to contact you? My phone's off. I don't know if he's called. My fart. Keep it that way. The less connection you have to your old life, the safer you'll be while we figure out a more permanent solution. He studied her face, his gaze lingering on the bruise that had faded from purple to yellow. You heal quickly? Is that significant? Mortals do. Compared to how slowly time moves for us, your wounds will be gone in days. Your fear will take longer. His hand rose, hovering near her cheek but not quite touching. May I? Tessa nodded, not sure what he was asking permission for. Nicolae's cool fingers settled against her bruised skin, and she felt a strange tingling sensation like champagne bubbles under her skin. When he pulled away, the pain was gone. What did you do? She gasped. An old trick. Vampire blood has healing properties. I shared a small amount of that gift with you. He stood, moving back toward the door. Rest more if you can. Tonight will be demanding. He left before she could ask more questions, and Tessa touched her face in wonder. The bruise was still visible, but the pain was completely gone. What other abilities did vampires have? What else was possible in this new world she'd stumbled into? She spent the day in the library, reading books about vampire history and lore. Most of it read like fantasy, but Nicolae had confirmed so much already that she had to believe the rest. Vampires age slowly after their transformation, which happened through a careful exchange of blood and magic. They were vulnerable to sunlight, though older vampires could tolerate it better than younger ones. They needed blood to survive, but not as much as stories suggested. A vampire could live on a few pints a week, easily obtained from willing donors. And they were territorial, hierarchical, governed by strict codes of honor that dated back thousands of years. The sanctuary law Nicolae had invoked was ancient, sacred even to vampires who ignored most other rules. To violate sanctuary was to invite the wrath of every vampire court in existence. No wonder he'd been so confident about protecting her. It wasn't just his personal power, it was the weight of immortal law backing him up. Tessa was deep in a book about vampire courts when she heard shouting from somewhere above. Male voices, one of them familiar in a way that made her blood run cold. Marcus. She dropped the book and ran toward the sound, her heart hammering. She should stay hidden like Nicolae had told her, but she had to know what was happening. The shouting came from the entrance hall. Tessa crept to the top of the stairs, staying in the shadows where she could see without being seen. Marcus stood in the center of the marble floor, looking smaller than she remembered, his face red with anger. He was shouting at Nicolae, who stood between him and the rest of the house with his arms crossed, looking utterly unbothered. My wife, and I demand you return her immediately. I don't care who you think you are. You can't just kidnap someone. Kidnap? Nicolae's voice was ice. Is that what you think happened? That I stole her from you? What else would you call it? She's not capable of making decisions right now. She's confused, emotional. She's standing at the top of the stairs, listening to every word you're saying. Nicolae's eyes flicked to where Tessa hid, and Marcus whirled around. Their eyes met, and Tessa saw the moment his anger shifted to something uglier. Tessa, baby, come down here. We need to talk. She doesn't need to do anything, Nicolae said softly, but his voice carried absolute authority. And you need to leave now, like hell. Tessa, get down here. We're going home. Marcus took a step toward the stairs, and Nicolae moved faster than human eyes could track, suddenly standing directly in Marcus's path. You're not listening. Let me be clearer. Nicolae's fangs were visible now, his eyes burning crimson. The woman you claim is your wife sought sanctuary at my threshold. I granted it. By the laws I'm bound by, she is under my protection until she chooses otherwise. You have no authority here. Marcus laughed, but it sounded nervous now. What are you supposed to be? Some kind of tough guy with contacts? I'm a vampire, the vampire king of this territory to be precise. And you, Marcus Owen, are trespassing in my domain, demanding I return property you have no right to claim. Nicolae leaned in close, and even from her position Tessa could see Marcus go pale. She's not yours anymore, she's mine, and if you ever raise your hand to her again, I'll remove the offending appendage and make you watch while it turns to ash. You're insane, Marcus whispered. No. I'm immortal, powerful, and extremely protective of what belongs to me. Those are very different things. Nicolae grabbed Marcus by the collar, lifting him off his feet with one hand. Now you're going to leave. You're going to forget this address, and you're going to tell anyone who asks that your wife left you. If you come back here, if you try to find her, if you so much as speak her name again, I will make what she suffered at your hands look like mercy compared to what I'll do to you. Am I understood? Marcus nodded frantically, and Nicolae dropped him. Marcus scrambled for the door, and Vivian appeared from nowhere to open it for him. giving him a sharp-toothed smile as he fled into the night. That was satisfying, Vivian said, closing and bolting the door. Though I would have preferred you let me have him for a few hours first. His death would cause complications. His fear is sufficient. Nicolae turned to look up at Tessa. You can come down now. Tessa descended on shaking legs. She'd wanted to see Marcus afraid, but actually witnessing it, seeing the man who'd terrorized her for years reduced to a cowering mess, left her feeling hollow and strange. Are you all right? Nicolae asked, his voice gentle again now that the threat was gone. I don't know. I should feel better, shouldn't I? Seeing him like that. But I just feel she couldn't find the words, empty, confused, like the satisfaction you expected isn't there. Nicolae guided her to a chair. That's normal. Revenge is rarely as fulfilling as we imagine it will be. But he's gone now, Tessa. He won't come back. How can you be sure? Because I could smell his terror. I could hear his heart racing with prey animal fear. Men like him are cowards at their core. They only feel powerful when they have someone weaker to hurt. Faced with a real threat, they crumble. Nicolae crouched in front of her, his hands resting lightly on her knees. You're free of him now. Truly free. Tears spilled down her cheeks and Tessa didn't try to stop them. Nicolae pulled her forward into his arms, and she cried against his chest while he held her with infinite patience, one hand stroking her hair. He was cool and solid and safe, and for the first time since her wedding day, Tessa let herself hope that things might actually get better. Time passed strangely in Nicolae's mansion. Days blurred together, each one slightly easier than the last. Tessa's bruises faded completely. She stopped jumping at every sound. She learned the names of the vampires who made up Nicolae's court: Vivienne, with her sharp wit and protective instincts; Damien, who oversaw security; Katerina, who managed the network of human allies that helped keep their existence secret. They were strange and beautiful and terrifying, but they treated her with the respect that came from Nicolae's clear affection for her. Because that's what it was, Tessa realized. Affection. Maybe even more. She caught him watching her sometimes, his crimson eyes soft with an emotion she was afraid to name. He sought her company constantly, teaching her about his world, listening with genuine interest when she talked about hers. They spent hours in the library, him reading from ancient texts while she curled up in a chair nearby. They walked through the underground court, Nicolae pointing out the history carved into every stone, and slowly, carefully, Tessa felt herself falling for the vampire king. It was insane, impossible. She'd just left one relationship. She shouldn't be thinking about starting another, especially not with an immortal predator who could kill her with a thought. But Nicolae was nothing like Marcus. He was kind without being condescending, protective without being controlling. He asked her opinion and actually listened to her answers. He made her feel valued, important, seen. You're thinking very loudly, Nicolae said one evening as they sat in his private study, the fire crackling between them. Sorry, just processing everything. Tessa set aside the book she'd been pretending to read. Can I ask you something? Always. Why do you really care? About me, I mean. You've gone so far beyond just offering sanctuary. You could have given me a room and ignored me, but instead you spend every night with me. You teach me, talk to me, seem to actually enjoy my company. Why? Nicolae was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. Do you believe in fate, Tessa? I don't know, maybe. I've lived 300 years. In that time I've known thousands of mortals, turned dozens into vampires, ruled courts and fought wars and shaped history. And in all that time I've never felt what I feel when I look at you. He set down his own book, giving her his full attention. When you collapsed on my doorstep, I felt something I thought I'd lost forever: hope. Purpose beyond mere survival. You remind me what it is to want to be better, to choose kindness over expedience. I'm just a broken woman who ran away from her husband, Tessa whispered. You're a survivor who refused to accept cruelty as her fate. You're strong and curious and brave, and you've brought light into a house that's been dark for far too long. Nicolae stood, moving to kneel in front of her chair. I care because I can't seem to help it. Because you've become important to me in a way I didn't think was possible anymore. And if that frightens you, I understand. But I won't apologize for it. Tessa's heart was racing. It doesn't frighten me, not the way you think. Then how? It frightens me because I feel it too. This pull toward you. And I'm scared of trusting it, scared it's just gratitude or rebound or trauma making me confused. She touched his face, his skin cool under her palm. I'm scared because you're a vampire king and I'm nobody. And this can't possibly work. You're not nobody. You're the woman who made me remember what it is to care about someone beyond duty. Nicolae leaned into her touch. And as for it working, we'll never know unless we try. This is crazy, Tessa breathed. Yes, Nicolae agreed. But the best things usually are. He kissed her then, gentle and careful, giving her every chance to pull away. But Tessa leaned in instead, her hands tangling in his long white hair, and kissed him back with all the longing and hope and desperate need she'd been trying to ignore. His hands were cool on her waist, pulling her closer, and Tessa thought dimly that she should be afraid of the fangs she could feel behind his lips, the predator's strength in the arms that held her. But all she felt was safe, wanted, cherished in a way she'd never experienced before. When they finally broke apart, Nicolae rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you, covered in blood and bruises. You have strange taste." But Tessa was smiling, really smiling, for the first time in longer than she could remember. "I saw past the wounds to the strength underneath, and I was lost." He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "But we should go slowly. You're still healing and I won't take advantage." Tessa kissed him again, cutting off his noble protests. "I'm not fragile, and I'm not making any decisions because I'm confused or traumatized. I'm choosing this. Choosing you. If you want me, won't you?" Nicolae laughed, the sound raw and full of emotion. "Tessa, I haven't wanted anything this badly in centuries, but you need to understand what you're agreeing to. I'm not mortal. I won't age. I'll outlive you by hundreds of years unless—" He stopped himself. "Unless what?" "Unless you choose to become like me, to be turned. But that's not a decision for now, not something I would ever pressure you toward." He stood, pulling her up with him. "For now, let's just be. Let me court you properly. Show you what it means to be with someone who sees your value." "Court me? Like with flowers and chocolates?" "I was thinking more along the lines of teaching you to waltz under moonlight and reading poetry by firelight, but I can adjust to modern expectations." His eyes sparkled with humor. "The old-fashioned way sounds perfect," Tessa admitted, and so began the strangest courtship in history. Nicolae was true to his word, treating Tessa like something precious. He brought her gifts from his centuries of collection jewelry that belonged in museums, books signed by their long-dead authors, art that made her gasp. He taught her to dance in the underground ballroom, holding her close while a quartet of vampire musicians played waltzes from another age. He introduced her to the intricacies of his world, let her sit in on court sessions where she watched him dispense justice with wisdom earned from centuries of life. She saw the respect his people had for him, the way they obeyed not from fear but from genuine loyalty. He was a good king, she realized, fair and strong and devoted to protecting those under his rule, and he was utterly devoted to her. Weeks passed in a blur of happiness Tessa had never imagined possible. She moved from her guest room to Nicolae's private chambers, waking each evening in his arms, his cool body wrapped around hers. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, sharing stories of their vastly different lives. He told her about the wars he'd fought, the loves he'd lost, the mistakes that still haunted him. She told him about her childhood, her dreams before Marcus, the person she'd been before fear had taught her to make herself small. "I want to show you something," Nicolae said one night, taking her hand. He led her deeper into the underground than she'd been before, through passages that grew older and older, until they emerged into a chamber that glowed with bioluminescent fungi. In the center stood a pool of water so clear it looked like glass. "What is this place?" Tessa breathed. "An old vampiric site predating even my birth. The water has properties we don't fully understand. It shows truth, reveals the soul of anyone who looks into it." Nicolae guided her to the edge. "I want you to look. I want you to see what I see when I look at you." Tessa knelt by the pool, her reflection staring back at her. But as she watched, the reflection changed. She saw herself through Nicolae's eyes, strong, beautiful, fierce in ways she'd never acknowledged. She saw the courage it had taken to run, the strength to keep surviving, the hope that still burned despite everything trying to extinguish it. She saw someone worth loving. Tears spilled down her cheeks and Nicolae knelt beside her. "That's who you are, not the broken thing your husband tried to make you. Not the victim. You're a survivor, a warrior, someone extraordinary. How can you see that when I can barely see it myself?" she whispered. "Because I've had centuries to learn to look past surfaces. And because I love you, Tessa. Completely, impossibly, eternally if you'll let me." The words hung in the air between them, precious and terrifying. Tessa turned to face him, seeing vulnerability in those ancient eyes, fear that she might not feel the same. "I love you too," she said, and watched relief transform his face. "I love you, and it's insane, and I don't care. You saved me in more ways than just taking me in. You reminded me I was worth saving." Nicolae kissed her there in the glow of ancient magic, and Tessa felt something shift inside her, like puzzle pieces finally clicking into place. This was where she belonged. Not in the mortal world that had failed to protect her, but here, in the arms of a vampire king who saw her as precious. But happiness, she'd learned, was never simple. The attack came without warning 2 weeks later. Tessa was in the library when she heard the alarms, a sound like bells mixed with something deeper and more primal. Vampires moved through the halls with sudden urgency, all heading toward the underground court. Vivienne appeared in the doorway, her face grim. "Come with me, now." "What's happening?" "An assault on the court. Rival vampires from the northern territories. They're challenging Nicolae's rule." Vivienne grabbed Tessa's arm, pulling her toward a hidden door she'd never noticed. "This leads to a safe room. You'll stay there until an explosion rocked the mansion and part of the ceiling collapsed." Vivienne shoved Tessa through the door. "Go. Lock it behind you and don't open it for anyone but Nicolae or me." Then she was gone, moving with inhuman speed toward the fight. Tessa stumbled into the safe room, a small chamber lined with steel and carved with protective symbols. She locked the heavy door and pressed her ear against it, listening to the sounds of battle above. It was terrifying, screams and roars that didn't sound human, the clash of metal, the crackle of what might have been magic. And through it all she heard Nicolae's voice commanding his people, defending his court. She couldn't just hide while he fought. The thought was unbearable. Tessa unlocked the door and crept back out, following the sounds of battle. The mansion was chaos, walls damaged, furniture destroyed, and in the entrance hall, Nicolae fought like something from a nightmare. He moved faster than her eyes could track, his strength evident in the way he threw opponents across the room like they weighed nothing. His eyes blazed crimson, fangs bared, and he was magnificent and terrible and utterly unstoppable. But there were so many attackers. Even as Nicolae fought, more kept coming. Tessa saw one break away from the main fight, heading toward her. Panic froze her for a moment. But then something Nicolae had said weeks ago came back to her. Sometimes strength is just surviving one more day. She grabbed a piece of broken wood from the debris, sharp at one end, and when the vampire lunged, she drove it into his chest with all her strength. He screamed and fell, turning to ash before he hit the ground. "Tessa!" Nicolae's roar of fury and fear split the air. He was at her side in an instant, pulling her behind him. "I told you to stay hidden. There were too many. I couldn't just. This is not your fight." His anger wasn't at her, she realized, but at the danger she'd put herself in. "Get back to the safe room now." But the fighting was ending. The attackers had realized they were outmatched, Nicolae's court rallying around their king with deadly efficiency. Those who weren't dust were fleeing, and Vivienne stood at the door, ensuring none escaped to report back. Damien approached, his face spattered with blood. "They're gone, my king. We lost 3 of ours, but we destroyed at least a dozen of theirs. They won't be back." Nicolae nodded curtly, then turned back to Tessa. "Are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine. She gestured helplessly at the destroyed entrance hall. "I couldn't stay hidden while you fought. You killed a vampire." Nicolae's expression was unreadable. "You, a mortal, took down one of my kind. That should be impossible." "I got lucky. He wasn't expecting it." Tessa's hands were shaking now, the adrenaline wearing off. "Lucky?" Nicolae pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "You terrified me. When I saw you out here, in danger," his voice broke. "Don't ever do that again. I can't promise that. If you're in danger, I'm not going to just hide." Tessa pulled back enough to look up at him. "I love you. That means we face things together. You're mortal. You're fragile." One of them could have. He stopped, closing his eyes. "I can't lose you, Tessa. I've only just found you." "Then don't lose me. Teach me. Train me. Make me strong enough to stand beside you instead of hiding behind you." She cupped his face, making him look at her. "I'm not leaving you, but I'm also not going to be a weakness you have to protect. Let me be a partner." Nicolae stared at her for a long moment, warring emotions flickering across his face. Finally he nodded. "All right, but we do this properly. You'll learn our ways, our combat techniques, our laws. And when you're ready, if you're ready, we'll discuss the possibility of turning me." Tessa's heart skipped. "Making me a vampire? It's the only way you'll truly be safe in my world. The only way we can have forever, instead of just decades." He searched her face. "But it's your choice. Always your choice. I would never force this on you." "I need time to think about it," Tessa admitted. "That's not a small decision. No, it's permanent and irreversible and would change everything about who you are." Nicolae kissed her forehead. "Take all the time you need. I'll love you whether you're mortal or vampire, for however long we have." The court took weeks to rebuild what the attack had damaged. During that time, Tessa began her training in earnest. Damien taught her to fight, surprised by how quickly she picked up the techniques. Vivienne taught her vampire politics and history, the intricate web of alliances and feuds that governed immortal society. Katerina showed her the practical side, how to move through the mortal world while keeping vampire secrets, how to identify threats, how to protect herself. And Nicolae taught her what it meant to be his partner. He included her in court decisions, valued her input, showed her the weight of leadership he carried. She saw the king he was, not just the man who loved her, and she loved him more for it. The Northern Territories are requesting a meeting, Vivian announced one evening during court. They want to discuss peace terms after their failed attack. Of course they do, Nicolae said dryly. They realize they can't win through force, so they'll try diplomacy. Tell them I'll agree to a meeting, but it happens here, on my territory, and they come with no more than 3 representatives. Agreed. Vivienne made a note. And what about the mortal? Will she attend? Every vampire in the room turned to look at Tessa where she sat beside Nicolae's throne. She lifted her chin, refusing to show the nervousness churning in her stomach. Why wouldn't I? Because you're still mortal, and the northern vampires will see you as a weakness. This from Damien, but his tone was respectful rather than dismissive. They'll try to use you against the king. Let them try. Nicolae's hand found Tessa's, his fingers lacing with hers. She'll attend as my consort. Anyone who challenges her challenges me. Murmurs ran through the assembled court, but no one argued. Tessa had earned their respect through her courage and her obvious devotion to their king, and Nicolae had made his position clear. She was under his protection, his partner, soon perhaps his queen. The meeting with the northern vampires was tense but ultimately successful. They agreed to recognize Nicolae's authority over the territory, to pay reparations for the attack, and to maintain peace for the next century at least. And they did indeed try to use Tessa as a point of weakness, suggesting Nicolae's attachment to a mortal made him unfit to rule. Nicolae's response was swift and uncompromising. My attachment to her makes me stronger, not weaker. She reminds me why we maintain our laws, why we don't simply ravage the mortal world despite our power. She's proof that vampires can be more than predators. Any vampire who can't see that is too short-sighted to question my leadership. The northern vampires backed down, and the meeting ended with treaties signed and peace established. Watching Nicolae defend her so absolutely, seeing the respect he commanded from vampires who'd lived centuries, Tessa felt her last doubts crumble. She knew what she wanted that night. As they lay together in Nicolae's chambers, Tessa turned to face him. I've made my decision about turning. Nicolae went very still. Tell me. I want it. I want to be like you, to stand beside you as an equal, to have forever instead of just a human lifetime. She touched his face, memorizing every feature. I want to be yours in every way possible. Are you certain? Once it's done, there's no going back. You'll be vampire, bound by our laws, unable to walk in daylight, needing blood to survive. Everything about your existence will change, I know, and I'm still certain. Tessa smiled. You saved me from one life, gave me a better one. Now I'm asking you to give me forever. Nicolae's expression was raw with emotion. I've turned others before, but never someone I loved. Never someone whose loss would destroy me if something went wrong. Then don't let anything go wrong. Tessa kissed him. Turn me, Nicolae. Make me your queen. The turning ceremony was ancient and formal, attended by the entire court. Tessa wore white like a bride and stood before Nicolae's throne while he explained to his people what was about to happen. This woman came to me broken and afraid, seeking sanctuary from mortal cruelty. She stayed and became my companion, my advisor, my love. Tonight she chooses to join us fully, to become vampire and take her place at my side. Nicolae descended from his throne, taking Tessa's hands. Do you come to this willingly, with full understanding of what you're choosing? I do. Tessa's voice was steady. Then let it be witnessed that by ancient right and mutual consent I will turn Tessa Owens, and she will rise as Lady Tessa Frost, my consort and equal. He drew her close, his lips brushing her ear. Are you ready? I love you, Tessa whispered. That's all I need to be ready. Nicolae's fangs pierced her throat, and Tessa gasped at the sensation, not pain exactly, but intensity. She felt her blood leaving her, felt her heartbeat slowing, felt herself slipping toward darkness, and then Nicolae bit his own wrist, pressing it to her lips. Drink, he commanded, and she did. His blood tasted like metal and magic and power. It burned going down, setting every nerve on fire. Tessa's heart stuttered, stopped, then started again, beating differently, stronger. Her bones felt like they were reforming, her senses exploding outward. She could hear everything, the breathing of every vampire in the room, the scratch of rats in the walls, the sound of traffic a mile above them. She could see in the darkness as clearly as daylight, pick out details she'd never noticed before. And when she opened her eyes, the world had changed. Colors were more vivid, sounds more distinct, and Nicolae standing before her looked like he'd been carved from starlight. She could see the magic that animated him, the power that made him what he was, and she felt that same power now flowing through her own veins. How do you feel? Nicolae asked, his voice full of concern and hope. Tessa looked down at her hands, watching her skin pale to match his, seeing her fingernails sharpened to points. She touched her teeth, feeling the fangs that had grown there. I feel incredible, strong, clear, Like I've been living my whole life underwater and just broke the surface. Relief washed over Nicolae's face. Then it worked. You're vampire now. You're mine forever. And you're mine, Tessa said, pulling him into a kiss that the assembled court cheered for. The transition wasn't entirely easy. Tessa had to learn to control her new strength, to manage the hunger for blood, to adjust to sleeping through the day and living at night. But Nicolae was patient, helping her through every step, and having eternity stretched out before them made every challenge worth facing. Months passed, then years. Tessa grew into her new role as Nicolae's consort, helping him govern the court, mediating disputes, using her relatively recent humanity to bridge the gap between vampire and mortal worlds. She became beloved by those under Nicolae's rule, known for her fairness and compassion. And every night she fell asleep in Nicolae's arms, grateful for the rain-soaked evening when she'd stumbled onto his doorstep, grateful for the vampire king who'd bolted his doors behind her and taught her what it meant to be loved without fear. She never saw Marcus again. She heard through Katerina's network that he'd moved across the country, remarried quickly, likely starting the cycle of abuse with some new victim. Sometimes Tessa felt guilty that she hadn't tried harder to warn his new wife, but Nicolae reminded her that she wasn't responsible for Marcus's choices, only for her own survival. You saved yourself, he told her one night, as they walked through the underground gardens he'd shown her. You found your strength, escaped, and built a new life. That's all anyone can ask of you. I wouldn't have survived without you, Tessa pointed out. You would have. You're stronger than you know. Nicolae pulled her close, his arms around her waist. But I'm grateful every day that you collapsed on my doorstep, that I got the chance to know you, to love you, to keep you forever. No regrets? Tessa asked, only half teasing. About turning a broken mortal into your vampire queen? You were never broken, just bent by circumstances beyond your control. And now he spun her in a dance, her white hair flying around her shoulders, a perfect match for his. Now you're exactly where you were always meant to be. At my side, in my heart, ruling this kingdom with me. Immortal romance, Tessa mused. It's not what I imagined for my life, better or worse, better, so much better. She kissed him, feeling the forever they'd been promised stretching out before them, full of possibility and adventure and love that would never fade. Above them, in the mortal world, the sun was rising. But down in their kingdom of shadow and stone, Tessa and Nicolae held each other and watched the magical lights that illuminated their realm. They were vampire king and queen, predator and partner, two beings who'd found each other across the impossible gulf between mortal and immortal, and they were happy. Years turned to decades and their legend grew. Vampires spoke of the king who'd honored sanctuary and found love. Mortals who knew the truth whispered about the woman who'd fled her abuser and ended up ruling the night. Their court thrived, a model of what vampire society could be when guided by wisdom earned through survival and compassion learned through suffering. Vivienne remained Nicolae's second, though she softened considerably toward Tessa over the years. I was wrong about you, she admitted one evening. I thought you'd be a distraction, a liability. Instead, you made our king better, stronger, more connected to the world we're meant to protect. I just loved him, Tessa said simply. The rest followed naturally. Love, Vivienne mused. Such a mortal concept, and yet you've proven it can transform even immortals. She raised her glass in a toast. To your happiness, my queen. May it last as long as your reign. It would, Tessa knew, because she and Nicolae had built something real, something that transcended the violence of their beginning. They'd taken sanctuary and turned it into a kingdom. They'd taken trauma and transformed it into strength. They'd taken the risk of loving across impossible divides and made it look effortless. On the 50th anniversary of the night Tessa had collapsed on Nicolae's doorstep, they stood together at the entrance of the mansion, looking out at the city above. The doors that had once bolted behind her now stood open, a symbol of the sanctuary they offered to anyone who needed it. Do you ever miss it? Nicolae asked quietly. Being human, walking in sunlight, having a normal life? Never, Tessa answered honestly. That life was killing me slowly. This one with you, with our court, with the purpose we've built, this is everything I never knew I needed. Nicolae pulled her close, and they stood together in the doorway between their world and the mortal one, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The vampire king and his queen, the protector and the survivor, together for eternity. And somewhere in the city above, another woman ran through rain-soaked streets, seeking escape from violence she didn't deserve. When she stumbled onto the steps of Nicolae and Tessa's mansion, when she collapsed bleeding and afraid, the doors would open for her. The vampire king and queen would take her in, offer sanctuary, and teach her what they'd learned, that sometimes monsters are kinder than men, that survival is its own form of courage, and that love can bloom even in the darkest places. The cycle of salvation would continue, as it had for 50 years, as it would for centuries to come. Because Nicolae had learned from his mistakes, and Tessa had learned from her suffering, and together they'd built something beautiful from the ashes of their separate pasts. This was their legacy, a kingdom built on compassion, a love that had conquered death itself, and doors that always opened for those who needed shelter from the storms of mortal cruelty. And for Tessa Frost, formerly Owens, who'd fled her husband with a bruised face and found a vampire king who bolted his doors behind her, this was happily ever after.